Wonderful event. And I would like to thank Indic Academy for all the great work they've been doing. And I would just like to say that it's a great honor to be in the presence of Major General Dr. G.D. Bakshi, Shrikant and Vivek ji. Great honor. So the central topic of both the books that we are launching today is the question of the origin of us, the Indian people, and the question of the origin of India's civilization and India's culture and religious traditions, and of the Sanskrit language, which has been the glue that has held together India's civilization. So this has become an extremely controversial topic. There are two opposite sides, two opposite narratives to this topic. One side says that India's culture, India's religion, India's civilization and the Sanskrit language are foreign in origin. And the other side asserts that India's culture, religion, language, Sanskrit and civilization are indigenous. They are native to India. Now, one of these sides is wrong, because both of these viewpoints cannot be correct at the same time. So to unpack and understand this issue properly, we need to travel back in time to its real origin. And its real origin is several centuries before Vasco da Gama first set foot in India in 1498. So once upon a time, several centuries before Vasco da Gama came to India, and just before the Islamic invasions of India, India had its own indigenous education system. So we have all heard of the universities, great universities of Nalanda, Takshashila, Sharda, and many more. So these were just the tip of the iceberg. India had tens, maybe hundreds of these great universities, and we are discovering new archaeological sites all the time. So we had these great universities, but India's education system was actually founded on the temples of India. The temples were the backbone of the Indian education system. Now, there were temples throughout India. Every city, every town, every village, every remote settlement had a temple. In fact, there is a Tamil saying that never reside in a village where there is no temple. So that's how important temples were to India. So the town temple and the village temple was where you received your basic education. Every child received a basic education. You would learn mathematics, you would learn arithmetic, every child would learn Sanskrit, and you would learn the basics of culture and history. So this education used to be enough for most children. However, some children would progress to a higher, more prominent temple. And there were thousands of these great, larger temples in India. And that's where you would not only study the Vedas and the Upanishads, but you would also study subjects such as philosophy and logic and linguistics and mathematics and calculus and trigonometry and medicine, for example, many subjects like these. So these were not just religious institutions, these were institutes of higher learning. And then we had the great universities where the brightest and most worthy students were accepted. So that was the system of India's education. Now, when the Islamic invasions began, all of India's great universities and temples were destroyed. They are all in ruins today. And many of the smaller temples were also destroyed. So what happened was that we know that India's great universities were renowned for their immense libraries. They had huge libraries. The library at Nalanda, for example, is believed to have been 9 stories tall. And these libraries were all burned down. And the library at Nalanda is known to have burned for over a month. So we can imagine how much knowledge we lost. We lost the records of thousands of years of our history. And that is how we became a people without a written history. And whatever history our ancestors were left with, they had to pass it down orally, by word of mouth, from generation to generation. And when the British occupied India, they deemed these oral histories of India as myths. And this is how foreign powers were able to control the narrative of our own history. So that is the background of the Aryan invasion theory. Now, when the Europeans first started coming to India in the 16th century, they began to notice striking similarities between the languages of India and the languages of Persia and the languages of Europe. So there are significant similarities in vocabulary and grammar, and these are too frequent and too consistent to be accidental, to be coincidental. So people were able to notice a correlation and a linkage between these languages. Now, the term Indo-European languages first came into use in the early 19th century. And in the middle of the 19th century, in the 1850s, Max Muller first proposed the idea of two Aryan races, a Western Aryan race and an Eastern Aryan race. And he proposed that the homeland of this hypothetical Aryan race was somewhere in Central Asia, and that one branch moved into Europe and one branch moved into India. He ascribed greater prominence and value to the Western Aryan race, and he hypothesized that the eastern branch of the Aryan race, which supposedly invaded India, was more powerful than the Indian natives, who were not so powerful and who were backward and easy to conquer. So this is the genesis, the starting point of the Aryan invasion theory. Then in the late 19th century, the British missionary Robert Caldwell divided the people of India into two categories, Aryans and Dravidians, based on perceived differences in skin color and language. So he proclaimed that he announced that the people of South India are Dravidians. They are a separate race, and that they are descended from the original natives of India. So this is how the Aryan-Dravidian split began. Now, in the 1800s, the British discovered the remains of an ancient river which began in the Himalayas, which flowed through western and northern India and drained into what is now known as the Arabian Sea. So this was a massive, very large river. It was much larger than the Indus and more powerful than the Indus. And the people who live in these regions where this riverbed is found have always known that a great river once flowed through this place, through this region, and they identify this ancient river with the Vedic Saraswati, which is the greatest and most exalted river in the Rig Veda. And in the 1800s, the British historians and explorers also readily accepted this identification of this dry riverbed with the Vedic Saraswati. Then in the 1920s, the great cities of Mohenjo-daro and Harappa were discovered by the British. They were excavated by the British, and they named this the Indus Valley Civilization. And in the light of this discovery, the Aryan invasion theory was modified to say that the Indus Valley Civilization was a Dravidian civilization which was destroyed by the invading Aryans. So after the discovery of these two great cities, many more cities were gradually discovered, cities, towns, other settlements, and it emerged that many of these ancient sites were along the banks of this dry riverbed of the Saraswati. So today we know that there are at least 1,500 unexplored archaeological sites along the dry riverbed of the Saraswati. And the Saraswati has the most number of settlements out of all the rivers in the Saptasindhu region. Therefore, it would be actually appropriate to call this civilization the Saraswati civilization instead of the Indus Valley civilization. So, how old was this civilization? The oldest archaeological sites that we have found so far are approximately 9,000 years old. And there are thousands of unexplored sites, which means that the civilization could be far older than that. So, the Saraswati civilization was the largest, most populous, most prosperous, and most advanced ancient civilization of all time. It was the world's first fully urban civilization. And its geographical extent started from Maharashtra in the south to Gandhara, which is Afghanistan in the north, and from Madhya Pradesh in the east, all the way to the western fringes of Balochistan in the west. So it was an enormous geographical expanse. And its culture was something that we would all recognize and identify with. Because archaeologists have found large numbers of swastika seals, Pashupati seals, statuettes of people in various yoga poses, statuettes of people folding their hands in namaste, female statuettes with the red pigment in the parting of their hair, and statuettes of women wearing bangles, just like they do today. In fact, the English archaeologist John Marshall said, and let me quote him, that taken as a whole, the Indus Valley people's religion is so characteristically Indian that one can hardly distinguish it from present-day Hinduism. So it's clear that there's strong evidence of cultural continuity between us and the people of this ancient civilization, and that this cultural continuity goes back to the very beginning of the civilization, around 9,000 years ago, and possibly even before that. So now in the 20th century, archaeologists looked everywhere for a sign of this Aryan invasion that they always spoke about. But they found none. You see, an invasion is a violent business. It leaves traces and signs in the archaeological record. You will find traces of soot and fire and ash, of destroyed cities, of destroyed towns and villages, of battles and massacres, of weapons and dead bodies. And there is no such thing. There's nothing. So, and they're still looking for it. So in light of this problem, the archaeologists and historians were forced to amend the theory to say that instead of an invasion, there was an Aryan migration. They migrated into India. And this assertion also runs into the same problem, because there is no sign of any migration. Migrations also leave telltale signs in the archaeological record. And these are not there, it's absent. Now, in the first decade of the 21st century, the new science of genetics began to provide new evidence. So it was discovered that the people of North India and South India, the people of Eastern India and Western India are all genetically alike. There is no significant genetic difference between all of us. We are all genetically alike, and we are all descended from the same ancestors going back several thousand years. So this was a very surprising discovery, and that put a huge spanner in the works of the Aryan invasion migration theory. And so historians further amended the theory. They now claim that there were multiple waves of small Aryan migrations into India, and that these migrants somehow magically succeeded in imposing their foreign culture, religion, and language on the natives without resorting to any kind of violence. So that's how this theory has evolved. So here's the thing. Every time this theory has been proved false, the eminent historians and academics who control the narrative of India's history have been quick to modify it. They have been quick to come up with a new version, a new iteration of the theory. There have been numerous iterations of this theory since it first began. And all of these iterations have one thing in common: the claim that Hinduism and Sanskrit are foreign to India. That is the core premise of the Aryan invasion theory, that Hinduism and Sanskrit are foreign to India. And what is the intent of this theory? The intent of this theory is to denigrate, demonize, and weaken Hinduism to justify the Islamic invasions of India and to justify the Christian colonization of India by claiming that since your religion is of foreign origin, therefore other foreign religions also have the right to invade and colonize your country. So that is the real purpose and intent of this theory. So is there any scientific evidence that proves this theory wrong? Yes, there is. There's lots of scientific evidence from the fields of archaeology, linguistics, genetics, and many other disciplines. I will not go into that right now, but I would recommend that you read the works of Shrikantji and Major General Dr. Bakshiji to find out more details about this. Now, from the 20th century onward, several Indian scholars were able to see through the distortions and the intent of the Aryan invasion / migration theory. And they proposed an alternate theory, the out of India theory, which claims that Hinduism, Sanskrit, and the Aryans are indigenous to India, and that instead of invading India, they actually ventured out of India and settled lands far to the west of India. So this is known as the out of India theory or the indigenous Aryans theory. And as we can expect, the academic elite have studiously either ignored or laughed off or brushed off this theory for decades. Then in the 1990s, Shrikant Talageri first came on the scene. And he is probably the first Indian researcher to do a systematic analysis of this issue from the viewpoint of linguistics and evidence from the Rig Veda. So he has written several books about this topic, and he has been the first person who actually produced solid, unquestionable evidence that falsified this Aryan invasion or migration theory. And we should note that he did this long before free speech became fashionable. He has toiled away, he has worked all alone, he has been fighting for the truth all these years all alone. And he has kept on going. So Shrikantji has falsified the Aryan invasion or migration narrative so thoroughly that the pro-invasion nexus has been forced to abandon all arguments that are based on linguistics and archaeology. Instead, now they are being forced to rely upon arguments based on the new science of genetics. So they now claim that genetic evidence should be the only criterion, the only factor that should decide whether Hinduism and Sanskrit came from outside India or not. So let me ask you something. If an Indian person converts to Christianity, will their DNA also convert to Christianity?
No.
If I learn to speak the French language, will my DNA also become French?
No.
Right, it's a nonsensical, absurd argument, right? DNA does not code for language or religion. And yet, this is the new desperate approach of the pro-Aryan invasion or migration lobby. So a new phenomenon has emerged in the past few years. For the past 5 to 6 years, a group of geneticists have assumed the leadership role of the pro-Aryan invasion or migration nexus. And they are led by a Harvard geneticist named David Reich. He has authored a book which claims that genetics has revolutionized the study of ancient human history. And he has enlisted an Indian business journalist named Tony Joseph to promote his work and to promote the Aryan invasion or migration theory. So Tony Joseph, this business journalist who has no background in genetics or science of any kind, has miraculously come up with a well-researched book which is based on David Reich's work and which claims to prove the Aryan migration theory beyond any doubt. And that's where Shrikantji's latest book comes into the picture. Shrikantji's latest book is a clinical demolition of the lies that Reich and Joseph are selling. So I read Joseph's book and I wrote a review article which obviously was quite scathing. And in response, Joseph had a meltdown on Twitter. So I invited him to a public debate, live streaming on the internet. I said, debate me, prove me wrong, and gather more publicity for your cause. And he refused. He ran. So what this tells us is that our adversary, this entire nexus, they are not interested in the truth. They know that they are wrong. They rely on lies and falsehoods and distortions to peddle and to further their agenda. And they will keep on doing this even if we prove them wrong. The truth doesn't matter to them. So this is going to be a battle of attrition. We're gonna have to keep on fighting. We're gonna have to fight inch by inch, foot by foot, trench by trench. And that's where the works of Shrikantji and Major General Dr. Bakshiji come in, because their works do not advance us by an inch or a foot. They advance our cause by a mile. So these are the role models that our children need. The soldier, the scholar, and the patriot should be our role models. We should support them, we should encourage them, we should promote their work, and we should honor them. Honor them.